Okay, let's take a look at Daniel 9 and the term used there for weeks. This is a particularly important aspect of this discussion, especially as it relates to a day for a year, because if indeed a day for a year is a thing, then this meaning weeks makes perfect sense. If it is not a thing, then we need to understand what this really means, because if it says weeks, then that was just a little over a year, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we need to dig into that a little bit. So let's start with Daniel 9. Here's the passage that we're going to be looking at again. Is Daniel 9:24 says 70 weeks are determined. Okay, that's the passage that we're interested in there. Before we spend a lot of time talking about this, we need to talk about the tools that we're using to determine if this is true. For those that have spent a lot of time looking at Concordance, the Strong's Concordance specifically, you need to understand what that is really telling you. If you want to use the tool and really understand what's happening behind the scenes, but do not want to learn Hebrew, okay? If those characteristics are true, then you should take some time to understand what that tool is telling you, because it may not be giving you an accurate answer. And that's kind of a hinting way of saying that Strong's bases the definitions of the words that it gives you on the way that they were translated. So if you're expecting a drastically different answer in Strong's from what's in the King James Bible, you won't find it, because Strong's is based on King James. Additionally, the numbers that are assigned in Strong's, the Strong's numbers for Hebrew for sure, maybe Greek, not sure on that, but they are mapped to meanings, not to words. This is a really important concept, especially in Hebrew. Hebrew, as you may or may not know, Hebrew has consonants, as all languages do, because it's necessary to have the hard sounds around which you wrap vowel sounds. The vowels in English, we write out our vowels. In Hebrew, not all vowels are written. Some is incorrect statement to say that Hebrew doesn't have vowels. Some people have said that, and that's not true. It does have vowels, but it does not have all the vowels written. And some of them are assumed, and some of them are implied. But what that does is it creates a scenario where some consonants together may have multiple meanings. And that means that those same set of consonants and mixture of vowels, if there are any, if they have multiple meanings, that same word, as it's written, may have multiple concordance, Strong's Concordance references. And I'm going to demonstrate that around this specific word, just to help explain why we have a little bit of a problem with this word, okay, and the way this is interpreted. But before I do that, I want to show you, let's flip back here. I want to show you a reference. This is from a site called, well, you can see it up here in the title bar. That is the site. And this has a reference for, or a page on what are Strong's numbers, specifically around Strong's Concordance. And this is actually a fairly accurate statement. This is a good one. So Strong's numbers are an index of every word in the original Hebrew and Greek texts of the Bible. Each Strong's number links to the English meaning, not to the word, not to the original Hebrew word. That's a really important fact that a lot of people don't know. Biblical words back to the original meanings of the Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. I'm going to put a link to this. You can read the rest of it. This is an important fact of how Strong's works. Here's an example. Tell you what, before we do that, let's look at the original text. Here's what the original text would look like for the passage that says 70 weeks. These two words that I've highlighted here, look at them on your screen. They look almost identical, don't they? They are identical. That is the 70 weeks. That's the part there that gets interpreted as 70 weeks. That's it. Now, as you, as a person that may or may not have knowledge of this language, when you look at that, how do you come away with the idea that that means two very different words? It can, especially in Hebrew. But here is some of the puzzle that our translator friends had to deal with. Okay, and it's not to imply that King James relied heavily on the Hebrew, because it actually didn't. King James relied a lot on the Vulgate and the Septuagint, and we'll take a look at those as well. That's the Latin and the Greek versions. So the Hebrew got translated into Latin and Greek, and then those got translated into English in the Bishop's Bible, and then later updated into King James Bible. King James wasn't the original. It's an update of a Bishop's Bible. But we'll look at that in just a second here. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here. I'm going to specifically, I want to take a look at the, here is the text in Daniel 9. I'm going to hit the interlinear, and I'm going to select the full text. We've done this before. I'm going to scroll down and look at the passage that says, verse 24 here, where it says 70 weeks. Now you see a lot of dots and dashes and all kinds of various things surrounding these words in this print. Those are not in the original manuscript, and they don't exist in the Torah today. If you go look at a Torah scroll, they are not written there. They are not written in common text in Israel. These are helper markers. They're called Niqqud. They represent vowels, and in many cases, and some of these they also represent canting markings. So if you were to sing this passage, you could almost think of these as notes to help you know when your voice is supposed to go up or go down or whatever. That's what a lot of this stuff is. And these were added much later. They were not part of the original text. They are there they were added because there was a concern that the language was going to be forgotten. They were going to forget how to say these words. So they didn't want to change the original text by going and adding in a lot of vowels. So what they did, and it's really clever, they added Niqqud dots around the words and around the letters that indicate different vowel markings. And I'll put a link to an article on Niqqud in the stuff below, so that you can go look at that if you wish. So the way this is written, these three dots underneath the bait here represent the U. The line underneath the shin here represents an ah sound. The dot at the beginning of this shin makes it a shin, otherwise it would be a sin. That's the sh sound. So the dot underneath the ayin represents the e sound. So the way this is read as written is shavuim, and shavua is a week. It's true. This is the way the Niqqud markings have placed this, indicate that at least it's related to a week. That is a true statement, the way the Niqqud has been marked here. And this is correct. If you go look at most texts that have Daniel 9, that have the Niqqud marking in them, which was added long time after, it's within the last 2 millennia for sure. The Niqqud marking, if you look at a text that has a Niqqud marking, this is basically what it'll look like. Here, under this word, we have the shin still, right? And we have the E sound here. We have two dots on top of each other. That means you stop. That's a stop sign. So you don't, the bait has no vowel sound leaving the bait. And then we have im here again. So this sounds like shiviim. So shavuim, shiviim is what these two words, the way they're written, with the Niqqud marking, that's how it would be pronounced. Okay. So is that really what it is? That's really the question here. Shavua, the word for a week. Let's take a look at that word. Okay, here is Shavua, or the word that's translated as weeks. We're going to hit the Strong's number here, which should take us to Shavua, and it does. There's Shavua. If we examine this word, you notice that there's an additional letter here that was not in the original passage that we were just looking at. There's a vav between the beit and the ein. Let me go back so you can take a look. So you see here we've got shin beit ein, yud mem, that's a mem suffix. If we hit that little button, then suddenly I've got shin beit vav ein. Well, this is actually the correct way to pronounce or to write Shavua. This is correct. It actually has the vowel marking here. That's modern Hebrew, though. Hebrew, like I said, did not always have, has not always had all the vowels. However, some have been added recently. Mostly vavs like this, and mostly yuds. And I'll show you some examples of yuds as well. But the vavs are added, especially in words like this, to distinguish between this word and what it would be without that is sheva, which means 7. So where you have 70 weeks, shevaim is sheva with a plurality on the end of it. The yud mem makes it plural. So the 7 with the plural means shevaim, 70, sevens. All right, and if you look at the yud here, though, that distinguishes between the sheva and shavua. It adds a clear distinction here. All right. Here's a good thing about doing this online with like Bible Hub. You can do this with your concordance too. So if you feel that I'm just looking at some devilish site that you can't verify this, no, I'm just looking at a site that makes this easier. If you want to go look this up in your concordance, you'll find exactly what I'm showing you here. Here's an example of a word that you should look at. So in Leviticus, this word right here is shivu'aim, just like we saw in Daniel. However, that word is correct. Let me explain why this one is correct and Daniel's isn't. There are 3 cases of number in Hebrew. You have a singular, which is obvious. It's one of something. You have a dual, which occurs not for all words, but for a lot of them. There's a way that you apply additional letters to it to make it an explicit number 2. So I can say, for example, that that's 1 year, shana. I can say it's 2 years, שנתיים, and I can say that it's multiple years. Shlosha, I don't remember the word, shanim. So, I'm sorry, Hebrew is not my strongest language. In this case, although we're missing some letters here, we're missing the vav. In modern Hebrew, it would have a vav between the beit and the ein, and it would have an additional yud between the ein and the mem if it was to say shivu'aim. Shivu'aim is explicitly 2 weeks. That is a thing. That's a real thing, okay? And if you look in your King James Bible at this passage, you will see that this was translated as 2 weeks. Now, that is the only time that this word that's marked this way has an im or an im on the end of it. Every single other translation in your King James Bible does it with either a sheva, such as this, in which case it doesn't have a plural marking at all, or does it with a shavuot, such as this in Deuteronomy. Now, in shavuot, that is the correct way to say weeks. Shavuot. ot. It adds the ot, not an I, not an im at the end of that. That is the correct way to say weeks. But you say to me, hey, ot sounds like a feminine plurality, where im sounds like a masculine, and I thought shavua was a masculine word. You are correct. All those words are correct. This is not the only time that this occurs in Hebrew. Hebrew has a lot of these, and you'll just have to learn them. I don't know of a pattern. I haven't seen a pattern for this yet. Maybe there is one. But an example is ava, which means father. Plural is avot. So it uses a feminine plural on the word ava in order to make it plural. It's not avim, it's avot. And avot is actually one of the prayers. It's fathers. It references the ancestry of Hebrew, of the nation of Israel, and etc. So avot is plural of ava. It's not the only time this occurs. The weekly after Havdalah, after the separation after Sabbath night, when the Jews do the Havdalah to make that separation between Sabbath and the rest of the week. At the end of that time, they say Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov. If it was a feminine word, then they would have said Shavua Tovah. Because the Shavua is a masculine word, it's Shavua Tov. So they're correct, and this is that it should be that it is a masculine word, but it does not have im as the plural indicator. Okay, so take a look through here on several of these words. We have this one right here. We have shavuot. This one's missing two vavs actually. There's a vav between the beit and the ayin, and between the ayin and the tav at the end. In modern Hebrew, there would be two more vowels in that to make it a little bit more clear. When you look at this, you can't be really sure just with the letters whether that's Shabbat or what that word is. The additional letters would make it Shavuot, which means weeks. And this passage actually is talking about the Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks is what the Christians tend to call Pentecost. Pentecost got its name because of 50 days. There was 50 days after the Pesach, the Passover. The Feast of Weeks occurred after 7 weeks. That's after a week of weeks, right? So after 7 weeks, which is 49 days, the next day was the celebration of Shavuot, the Feast of Shavuot. So known as the Feast of Weeks. That's what this is referring to, and that literally means weeks. Shavuot means weeks. So if we scroll down here and look through all of these, the only time that we're going to find this word in King James translated as weeks is here. We saw up here in Leviticus, we saw the same word, but it wasn't translated as weeks. It was translated as 2 weeks because it's Shavuaim. It literally means 2 weeks. Okay, but down here, we're trying to translate this word as weeks and it's not trying to be translated as a technical 2 weeks, because then that would say 70 times 2 weeks. That's not what it's saying. So it doesn't. This is the wrong use of the plural here. Okay. So let me recap, because that was a lot of stuff I just read you. Okay. The original Hebrew did not have Niqqud. It looked, let's see if we can find it. It looked like this. So the original Hebrew did not have Niqqud. It looked very much like this, with the exception of like these brackets and the bars here. These are indications for the modern reader that some of these passages or some of the words we're not sure based on the manuscripts on what the original text was. And you'll find this in King James as well sometimes. If they're adding a word to make it make sense, it's usually italicized. All right? So they do the same type of notation in various versions of the Bible when they're translating things. So you don't know whether or not that was what they were supposed to do with those words originally. So they make notations like this. Okay? That also could be done as a margin note. So, but in the original text, none of this had any Niqqud marking. So there was no way to be clear just by looking at this. If you pick out one word and say, what word is that? The reader would not know. You need to look at the whole sentence and see how the word is used in the sentence. Okay, so the Niqqud was added later. Vowels were, more vowels were inserted in addition to Niqqud, especially in modern Hebrew. But regardless, Shavua, which is a week, is a masculine word, and as a masculine word, though, it uses, this particular word, uses a feminine plural indicator as ot. So Shavuot is the correct way to write weeks. And this doesn't say ot. It doesn't say Shavuot. It just, it's got an im at the end of it. So one thing that we could say that this absolutely could mean is 70-70, because that word, as it's written, is 70. Shavi'im. Okay. Let's take a look at, let's go back here for just a second. Let's take a look at this word. So the one that's translated 70, if you take a look at this word, which is 7657 in your concordance, that falls, 7657 falls right here, Shibi'im. All the rest of these words that I've highlighted, all of them use the same basic spelling and conjugation of those three basic letters. Let's take a look at one. There's Sabah. Okay. If we were to scroll through all of these, here it is again. So right here, this is the original word. If we keep scrolling through these, you're going to find that the only meaningful difference between these words is the Niqqud markings and, very importantly, the definition. Okay. So look at all these words. This is several so far that I've found, and we haven't gone through a lot of them. So look at this. Now here's Sheva. That's 7. Now 7, the word Sheva, is of course the root for the word week. Shavua is based on Sheva, 7. Of course it is. There are 7 days in a week. How else do you think we got a week? But that is not the same word. It's not exactly the same word. And the way it's used is different. Okay, so, wow, a lot of stuff. Hope I didn't blow past anybody on that. Sorry if I did. Let's take a look at a couple. Hopefully you can go back and review this if I went too fast. Let's take a look at a couple sections here, okay? This is from the Vulgate. This is the Latin Vulgate, which was a likely source, or at least a consideration. I'm not sure how much of Daniel in the King James was originally translated from the Vulgate, Septuagint, or Hebrew. I know that the Septuagint and the Vulgate, especially the Vulgate, had a lot of influence in the Old Testament. So I'm going to pull them both up, and then we're going to do a little more research on what the possible interpretation could have been, and we'll see if maybe we can come to an answer on why that was listed as Shivi'im instead of what we would have expected as Shavuot, which means weeks. All right. So here's 70 weeks. That's what it says in Vulgate. Okay. So that was, if that was a source, then it makes sense that it would be translated that way. This, whoa, wall of text. Thanks, Cliff. So this is the Greek version, the Septuagint, and I hope everybody knows this isn't really the Septuagint, the original. Septuagint was lost, right? This is just the Greek translation that got called the Septuagint, right? So it's not the original Septuagint. Anyway, so this one also says 70 weeks. So both of them, the Septuagint and the Latin, the Vulgate, say 70 weeks. So it's completely reasonable to expect that the translators would put in 70 weeks as the translation of that passage. So does that make it bad? No. It helps us understand how they got there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's right, though. All right. So let's take a look at another passage. Here, and this took some time to find, This was not an easy one to locate, but I think this is what we will refer to as the smoking gun that helps us explain why the passage is written the way it is. In Hebrew, there's not really an easy way to make a number plural. So if you were to say 7 sevens or 70 sevens, the number sevens, plural, there's not an easy way to write that. It's easy in English. You just throw an S on the end of it, and that makes it plural. In the entire Bible, there really isn't a lot of reference for this type of use case, but there is at least one. I found one other place where this is used in the book of Ezekiel. So if we take a look at Ezekiel, chapter 42, verse 3, okay, we'll read what it says in King James. Says, this is where Ezekiel is speaking about the temple and the description of the temple. Okay, it's a very long, many chapter passage here. So over against the 20 cubits, which were for the inner court, and over against the pavement, which was for the outer court, was gallery against the gallery in 3 stories. 3 stories. Okay, you notice the stories here is italics. If you're not familiar with that in King James, that means that the word stories is not in the original text. They threw it in there because it made sense. It helped the word make sense. All right, we're going to hit the interlinear button up here and flip over to verse, well, we'll just hit chapter. All right, so now let's go look at chapter, or verse 3. All right. So right here, stop that. Here's the last 2 words in this verse. This says, can't even say this. Be-shaloshim. Now, shalosh is 3. Shloshim is 30. So to say Be-shloshim actually would mean literally. If you lifted it out of the sentence and showed somebody that word and said, what does this mean? They would say to you, well, shloshim means 30, just like Shivi'im means 70. Okay, so Be-shloshim, the bet at the beginning of that is a preposition. Sometimes Hebrew changes the spelling of words in adding prepositions to the beginning, or conjugation, or throws or conjunctives, or throw possessives on the end of the word. Hebrew does all kinds of fun stuff like that that makes it sometimes more difficult to read. But the ba at the beginning here, you notice the Niqqud marking here, that the ba as opposed to be indicates that this is a specific. So Be-shloshim means, if you were just to lift that word out, it means in the 30. Okay? But this is translated as in the 3rd story. All right. So the way this word is used, it means in the 3s. This word, the way it's literally used, it means in the 3s. In the same way, that's how the words are used in Daniel. Here, when it's referring to, because it cannot mean 30, it doesn't make sense if we try to make it say 30. It does make sense if we say that they're making 3 plural, and they're saying in the 3s, as in 3 stories. They had a level in the 3s. There were 3 levels. That makes sense. To say that there were 30 doesn't make sense. In the same way, using the same construction, we have a similar pattern in Daniel 9. Now, if we look at Daniel 9, recognizing this pattern, then what do we actually see? In Daniel 9, if we were to interpret this as Shivi'im meaning 7s, and then Shivi'im meaning 70, that makes sense. And it fits the description. It makes sense, and it's consistent with what Hebrew means, because this isn't, Shivi'im doesn't mean weeks, ever. It can't. Shivu'im means 2 weeks, and this is clearly not 2 weeks. So this is not right. It can't mean weeks, but it can mean 7s. And 7s, 77s, is an appropriate way to look at this, because if those represent years, it doesn't say whether it's years or days. If they represent years, then a cycle of 7 sevens becomes a period of time between the years of Jubilee. And you notice that they make a specific reference here, 7 sevens and 62 sevens. This leads the discussion far more to the idea that this is probably talking about the year of Jubilee, and an indication of how in control of their own land the Israelites will be in order for this to even be a thing. This is a promise. You remember, this is coming in the context of a promise. This shows that the land of Israel will be fully owned, and that there will be the possibility of having the year of Jubilee when land is restored. So we have the 7-year cycle of the return of the leased workers, or the slaves, if you want to call them that. They really weren't. But the working cycle, we have the 7 years cycle of that. 7 of those becomes the return of the land and the property, and that's the year of Jubilee in the next year, right? So here we go. And this, and interestingly, Shavuot, after Pesach, the 50 days after that, is like a mini-cosm that happens every year to remind the people of this. And that's some of the beauty around what happened at the point of the giving of the Torah. The common belief is that the giving of the Torah occurred on Shavuot. And that makes sense when you think about that, as the New Testament references the giving of the Holy Spirit to the people and the speaking in tongues and everything that happened at that period of time. That would have been right on the mind of everybody that was in the temple worshiping at that time when they heard that. This microcosm, the release, the return of the property, and the giving of the Torah, and then the giving of the Holy Spirit, all of those things are directly related. This is making a reference to that. If it says weeks, it's veiled at best. If it says 7 sevens, and it's referencing the sabbatical year cycle and the year of Jubilee, this is significant. And it would be a sad thing to lose that. So to summarize, all right? So in the King James, it does indeed say 70 weeks. And if you read the English Bible, then you will come away with a realization that 70 weeks is just a little over a year, and that's probably not what it meant. However, that's not what the original text said. The original text can't be interpreted that way, because Shevuim is not plural. A Shevuim doesn't exist. Shevuim is indeed a plurality, but it's a plurality in a specific way, representing 2 weeks, even without the additional yuds. Okay, so even if it was written in Old Hebrew and it missed the vav and the yud, and pronounced Shevuim, as we saw in Leviticus, that word doesn't make sense here, because in that context, that would mean 2 weeks, not just a week. That's not what this means. Shavuot means weeks. So let me give you one more resource, okay? This is Pialim. This is a good site. If you are interested in looking up various word conjugations or other stuff, this is primarily for verbs, right? But however, there are some other interpretations here. So if we write in Shavua, that's how it's spelled in modern Hebrew, and hit enter, then of course it says weeks. It gives us a week, right? So let's hit all forms. The word singular is Shavua. The word plural is Shavuot. Now, in ancient Hebrew, recognize that some of them or all of these vowels may be missing. The rest of the letters are going to be there, but these vowels, and that's the vertical line. The vav is the vertical line. Those letters may be missing in the original text, but Shavuot is the plural form of week, not Shivim. It just isn't a thing, okay? So there are many other resources. You can go down here and look at some of the other forms of how Shavua, or And it should be E, by the way, is 1/7. And this is seventh. This is seventh as a, not as a percentage, but as a ordinal number. So it's seventh, like the seventh day, would be written this way. It should be E. If you were going to make it seventh, like it's 1/7 of something, that would be Shavuot. You would add an oath at the end of this. 7, we already talked about Shiva. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to throw too much stuff and make this confusing. So Shivaim can't mean weeks. Cannot mean weeks. It can mean 2 weeks if it's Shivuim. But it can mean, and there is a demonstrated example of where a word used like this does mean plurality of the word. So it can mean sevens. That's possible. So if it means sevens, then this means 77s, and it's a reference to, in the way that the passage is written, it's a reference to the sabbatical years and the year of Jubilee. And that is a clear indication as to an absolute time. It is not a subtle, maybe it's a year, maybe it's a day thing. It's very clear. Okay. Sorry to spend a lot of time on this. It's kind of an important topic. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm sure there's going to be questions, and I'm sure I may have messed up something here or there, but if I did, drop me a note in the bottom and yell at me and let me know. All right. So, all right, let's see what else we've got.